free. Let's talk about them hills. Let's talk about the gold might be waiting for me there. Let's talk about the dogwoods and Appalachian hills. Let's talk about the gold might be waiting for me there.
Have everybody's attention, please. I'd like to introduce Miss Cassie to the podcast. Y'all gather around now.
All right, so Mr. Matt Mercer, you are the North Carolina GOP Communications Director. How did that happen?
I oftentimes wonder about that myself. It all goes back to someone that I've known for a long time. I can't say too much about him right now because he's running for U.S. Senate, but I worked for Michael Whatley when he first ran for state party chair. I took a detour into journalism for 4 years, and then for a period of 1 week before he went to the RNC, I came on back joining him as communications director here at the state, and have been here since March of 2024.
So how do you like it?
It's a great job. I really enjoy having fun, beating up Democrats most days, really talking about our party. I really enjoy that back and forth because it brings a lot of the skill sets I think I've had over the years working in politics, working in the private sector, working as a journalist, to really bring all that now here to benefit the party and the values that I really care about.
How is that different from being a journalist? How different is your life now when you're working with North Carolina GOP as opposed to interviewing people and really exposing things that are going on in politics?
Yeah, what I would say is that I told people the reason that I got into journalism and media was I hated most of the media in the state, and I thought if I had the opportunity that I could do it better. And so I did that for 4 years, working with the staff. That was fantastic, writing my own stories, doing that research. But I really felt, especially going into 2024, that there was a different calling that I had, and it was taking everything I had learned and being able to use it for candidates and people that I truly wanted to see elected, and want to be able to tell people, hey, we need to elect Donald Trump as president again. And really taking those experiences, going back to the party, and really working every day to make sure that we won as many elections as we could. And now going into 2026, it's the same thing.
The North Carolina GOP is actually having a lot of wins recently. I heard that we are about to supersede Democrat registrations. What do you think has changed?
Yeah, so there's a stat that we like to talk about a lot. And when President Trump was first elected in 2016, that night, Democrats had a 645,000 voter registration advantage over Republicans. To see that now where it's going to flip, if it hasn't already by the time this comes out, is truly astounding, because what you're talking about is the electorate in the state has been fundamentally reshaped. And a lot of that credit goes to President Trump and the energy that he's brought to politics, where people see that the things he's talking about, they support, and they see someone as a Republican who has been fighting every day for the last 8 years and will fight for the next 4 years. And so really what you're talking about is an effort when Republicans get elected, which we took the General Assembly for the first time in both chambers in a century in 2011, being able to alter so many things in our state for the better, that we have more registered Republicans than ever. We have more elected Republicans than ever right now. When you're talking about every level of government, it's a case of where a state has been fundamentally changed for the better, because Republicans have gotten off the sidelines, have gotten engaged, and have been able to put up a lot of wins.
Do you think that the fact that the Democrats seem to be moving further and further to the left has played a role in that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not your daddy's Democratic Party, to where you hear so many people when they first moved to the state, decades ago, say we had to be a Democrat to get a job. You had to be a Democrat to get anything. And that's not the case anymore. This is a party that held control over the state for a century. And people just, that was the default. It wasn't, being a default independent. No, the default was being a Democrat. And so being able to show that this party has just lost their ever-loving minds, this party is one that does not believe, there are two genders. This party does not believe that you're entitled to keep your own money. This is a party that is really antithetical to Western civilization at this point. And so I think people have been seeing that now, and it's taken a lot of work by a lot of people to get to this point to where, yes, Republicans are going to be the dominant party in this state now.
A lot of people say that North Carolina is purple. And when I was growing up, I could kind of see that because, half of my family was from Western North Carolina, half of my family was from Southeastern North Carolina, and there was a political divide there. But 10 out of 14 districts in North Carolina are red. And to me, that signifies that we're a lot more conservative than people give us credit for. Do you agree with that? Do you think that North Carolina is purple, or do you think that we're a conservative state with blue districts?
I think by and large, we are a conservative state, but the way that our state is balanced with you have blue cities and a red rural area where if you look at the Democratic Party traditionally, they dominated in the rural areas because it was a different Democratic Party. I mean, you had Andy Griffith made TV ads for Democrats in the 80s and 90s. And so what you see is there's still vestiges of that still exist. And you have the newer Democrats now who are Marxist, but they still like to claim that lineage of that party. And so what it makes for is competitive elections because people still want to believe that's the Democratic Party. It's what existed before, not what exists now. And so as Republicans, it's taking a long time to finally turn those rural areas red to where rural areas now vote overwhelmingly Republican, to still battle for suburban areas and people that change. I think a lot of times you see that Republicans have done really well in areas, and now it's always shifting. So as the electorate evolves and shifts, I think Republicans have done a great job. Look at the Lumbee, for example. They voted Democratic for a long time. They flipped. Now they vote over 62 to 65% Republican because they recognize their values no longer aligned with that party. And so I think the impetus will continue to be on Republicans to engage not just those here, but as North Carolina has continued to grow, to make sure that we're engaging with everyone that comes here. Like, you came here for a reason, and it's these policies because we've had the General Assembly and have been writing budgets for the last 12 years. And so I think Republicans need to continue to stay on offense and do that. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing every day.
We do have some areas that are scary blue. Like, we're talking areas that are like little San Francisco. We have Asheville, we have Charlotte. What is the North Carolina GOP's plan to reclaim those areas?
Yeah, and it's always a battle, right? So you're dealing with that to where you have what's happened in Charlotte this year is a perfect example. Irina Zarutska gets brutally murdered on the light rail. We go down, hold a press conference, after that, especially after the video comes out and you show that. It's one thing you see the news story, but when you see it, I mean, you feel it. And it was tough. And so we go down, we do this press conference. Everyone talks about, no, Charlotte really has a lot of issues. And we had Fox News was there, CNN was there. I counted because it's my job to count the number of cameras. We had 12 TV cameras there from local news stations, national news, talking about this issue, really trying to make it an issue with the elections in Charlotte that came up. And it wasn't enough. And that's really sad. And so you see that happen, and it's like, okay, what can we do better? Because I feel like everyone tried their best to turn people out, to get people to pay attention. And I think you can always look at it as a case of, well, these areas, yeah, it's tough. But it's no reason to back away from the fight. But you also, every election is a math equation at the end of the day. And so we want to win a district, you win statewide, you have to turn out the voters agree with you and persuade those who can be persuaded. And I think there are people who simply can't be persuaded no matter how much you try. And so as a party, you're always looking to expand that coalition of who you can persuade and who you can that agrees with you to make sure that they come out. But battling that voter apathy is one that I don't think we're the only ones dealing with it, but it really sucked when you see what's happened in the city of Charlotte, and they flip seats held by a Republican to a Democrat.
I was shocked. I mean, honestly shocked, because what's going on in Charlotte, now that there's been a spotlight put on it, we're realizing this wasn't the first time that happened. It's not going to be the last time it happened, and it continues to get worse. And it just completely threw me for a loop that Republicans didn't show out in mass for that election. Is there a way to fix that? Many people have said that, the reason that we're having issues drawing people in to vote is because we have off year elections. And if we just moved everything to the same time that the presidential election was going on, that a lot of those problems would cure themselves.
Yeah, and that's been a debate, and we're in a building where hopefully they look at that again at some point. So the reason that you had the off-year election originally was you wanted to have the local issues not get drowned out by what was happening nationally, because that's where a lot more money is spent. That's where you have other people coming in, and so people forget about those local issues. I don't know that we've been served well by that lately, and so yeah, I think it's worth exploring whether that, given in today's climate, is that actually going to be better off than people voting every year to really gear up for these even years in the future. So I really think that's an idea that needs to be talked about more.
So let's talk about unaffiliated voters. The number of unaffiliated voters in North Carolina is increasing. How does the NCGOP intend on appealing to them? Because this is a group of people who could vote either way on any given election, and it's an important group that needs to be tapped into.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And so with unaffiliated voters, it comes down to data at the end of the day. We have to know who they are, what motivates them to vote, what motivates them to support a candidate, what policies they support, where are they from? Are they from North Carolina? Have they moved here for one reason or another? And so really a lot of the work that a party does, and I'm sure the Democrats do this too, is they're trying to learn who these voters are. You can look at their history. There's different data programs that we both use. And so really it's not a monolithic block. A lot of unaffiliated voters, they either favor one side or another. There's a smaller group that truly are independent because they're the ones who aren't following politics closely. But at the same time, politics will care about you whether you care about politics or not. And so what we do is try to figure out who these people are, what's going to motivate them to vote, and then if they agree with you on these issues, making sure that we have the people to get them out to vote.
A lot of unaffiliated voters follow me on social media, and so they reached out with questions. And one of those was, how do you appeal to unaffiliated voters after changing the congressional map? And for many of them, they see it as gerrymandering.
Yeah, I think that Republicans were very clear that with the battle that we have right now, where we know if President Trump loses the House to Democrats, Democrats are going to impeach him. Democrats are going to do everything they can to stop his agenda. Look, we're a state that voted for President Trump 3 times. A lot of states didn't in 2020. North Carolina did. And so what we want to do is protect an agenda that the majority of people in this state voted for, especially if you don't do that, as we just saw with Indiana. What did they get for a stand that they made not to redraw their lines? Democrats are going to keep doing it. Gavin Newsom is going to keep doing it. These Democrats have no load they won't stoop to. And so if we're not willing to fight, and there's a guy running for Senate in another state, and he said something the other day on X, and it really has stuck with me ever since. He said that we're in a street fight for Western civilization right now. When you see what happened at Brown University with a college Republican being murdered, a lot of the reports say maybe she was targeted by that. When you see what happened in Australia, we're really in trouble. And we have problems just like that here at home, too. And so that fight is one that won't be won just by winning an election. We have to keep the pressure on in between. We have to pass legislation that targets that. We have to continue the things that President Trump has said he wants to do and is doing. And so if you truly believe that President Trump needs that support, if this is an agenda you agree with, yeah, let's do everything we can to make sure that we protect it. And so I completely fall in that line of thinking right now.
I never knew that these maps were racially drawn to begin with. And I never knew that they were just kind of crazy. And I've seen some of these maps that just literally make no sense, right? Wouldn't that have actually been gerrymandering? Whereas what has been redone seems a little more logical than what some of the maps that the Democrats have given us in the past.
Yeah, so the classic one is the 12th district with Mel Watt. It was court ordered gerrymandering to draw that district that went at one point from Gastonia, following I-85 all the way over to Durham, and it changed various times over that. But the way they kept that district contiguous was it would cross bridges. So you had one congressional district over this bridge and one of them underneath, and that's how it stayed continuous. So just imagine that being your logic as from a judge in a court is like, no, these lines now keep counties together. They keep communities who have more shared interests together, which is, again, a stated goal that Democrats say that they have. But what they also do is every time Republicans draw a map, they immediately run to court and sue every single time. So that's why you have so much litigation, because people like, you don't have to sue over the map. You don't have to like it, but also you're the one that's putting it in the courts again. And so really I see that as being more egregious with what we're seeing with judicial overreach broadly.
Also think that it creates racial division because I'm a strong believer in culture and I think that our culture ties us together. And I believe that those ties cross racial boundaries. And yet, politically, they want to divide us racially intentionally.
That is part and parcel of what the Democrat Party does nowadays. It's something to where I thought about this years ago. They want to put everyone in a box. So you are white, you're in this box. You're a female, you go in this box. You are black, you go in this box. You're Hispanic, you go in this box. And so the way that Democrats have traditionally messaged that is they appeal on those demographic things about your skin color, your gender. And when you cross those and you have a black Republican, they don't really like them because you're out of your box at that point. And so what Democrats try to do is they maintain power by keeping everyone in their boxes, where I think from what we believe, everyone should be united. And we have things that are greater than that are, as North Carolinians, as whether you're from Eastern North Carolina, you're from Western North Carolina, you're from the Sandhills, that means everybody that lives there, right? And so I think just from a values perspective, you can share values without being stuck in this box that Democrats put you in for their own political power.
I actually think that that's the reason that long before I was talking about politics, I was often getting beat up on by Democrats. And I think that they did not like my message that it does not matter what color you are, or, if you are from North Carolina, we have things in common. And I think that that drove them insane.
Yeah, I think you're right, because it's what they're trying to do is fit everything now into the Marxist mindset where you have the oppressed and oppressors. And so those are the only two things at that point that they look at. Who are the oppressors? Who can they beat down? And who can they lift up as oppressed? And so that's completely antithetical to, I think, the values as a North Carolinian, but just Western civilization itself. Because we have a republic there where we teach people there are rights and values that you have that come from God, not what the government does for you.
We experienced the loss of a supermajority, and a lot of people are really upset about it. How did that happen? And how can we get the supermajority back?
Yeah, I'm right there. I didn't want to see it happen either. But what we had was money that came in, especially towards the end of 2024, that was able to spend in these races where Democrats were able to, by a couple hundred votes, take that one seat away from the supermajority. No one was happy about it, but you also, at a certain level, like an election's over, you have to regroup and say, okay, what can we get done? There have been a lot of overrides on different legislation this year. They were able to bring a Democrat that they needed into that. And so the goal for 2026, absolutely get the supermajority back. There are seats where you can do that, but it takes message, it takes money, and it takes, as our chairman says, brute force to win these elections. And so I think that's the next goal, to make sure that we get that back, because it's definitely, life is a lot easier when you have it than when you don't.
What about grassroots? The left is incredible about presenting a united front. And here in North Carolina, I've noticed, and remember, I'm not the most political person in the world. I'm not involved in, the apparatus of the GOP. But I've noticed that it seems like there's a great divide between the establishment GOP and the grassroots groups. Can you tell me why that is?
I think there is always a certain amount of tension based on the level that you're at, because there are people who, and this will go both ways, where you have, let's take someone. So I was at an event this past weekend in New Bern. A guy like Bob Pruitt from Carteret County, he's 90 years old and he's still out going to events, doing things. He got an award at this particular event. Never been sought elective office, never done that. But the fact that he's been around for a long time, there are people who look at him as he's establishment. He's the epitome of a grassroots guy. He has organized in his county for decades at this point. And I think a lot of times people get caught up on, if you've been around for a long time, you sort of get lumped in as establishment. But that new blood at the same time, from a grassroots perspective, is essential to keep the party going. Because there's one, I will say, here's one thing from a Democrat I agree with. The job of a county chair, and the chairman of the DNC said this recently, you're like a fire hydrant. Everybody pisses on you. Being a county chair or a district chair, having leadership, it's the most thankless job in politics. And so the people who do that, it's hard. You're not getting paid. You have responsibility, and nobody's happy with you at the end of the day. And so you have to be willing to accept that going in, because you truly care about the party. You care about your state, to be able to put up with that in order to elect people who share your values and see that change. People who really love our country and love our state are the ones signing up to do those jobs. And it's like any other group, personalities oftentimes get in the way of things. I don't like this person, I'm going to go start my own group type things. I would say for me at least, I enjoy spending time around both. You certainly learn different things, but I think one thing that, with especially with President Trump, is I think it's actually been brought together more than in previous years. I'm old enough to remember when Rush Limbaugh would shut down Congress multiple times. He'd tell people to call to stop bad legislation. I don't recall that happening recently, because everyone is on board with what President Trump wants. And so I would say, contrary to what people may think because of social media, I think there's the establishment and grassroots are closer than they've been in the past.
How can the NCGOP do a better job about helping present that united front? Because on social media, it does come across like things are divided.
Oh, at Matt Mercer, if you want to give me more ideas, I'm happy to I'm happy to do that. Um, it's really about understanding what the party is and isn't. And so I am going to get to use this quote now. And so what I often tell people over the last year or so is, be careful wishing I had the power you think I do, because you may not like how I use it. I think we have a very open and transparent party, to where if you care about an issue, you can make your voice heard. Absolutely, you can do that. We have resolutions to do that. You can go to a meeting and raise hell about something, and people will start to listen. And they may or may not agree with you, but they're willing to listen. And so I think from a Republican Party perspective, it's understanding what is the job of the party. It is to recruit, train volunteers to get Republicans elected, and then hold those elected Republicans accountable, but also support them when they do things that you like. It's not always about shooting at them because of a certain thing. I think a lot of times we get confused about, we do a lot of really good things, and I wish that people would celebrate that a little more. But then also, yes, because no one is perfect, except for there's one man who walked this earth who was perfect. Um, really understanding that they're, most of the time, I'm not saying everyone, but most people are trying to do their best, especially um, honestly, because I was able to spend so much time around him. President Trump is working day and night to do that. I think people could really learn a lot from the work ethic that he has. But then I think there's also a need that let's support our people the way that Democrats do. I mean, they elected a Marxist, anti-Semitic hater as the mayor of New York City. Like, how does it get more together than that? And so let's play through the primary process, but let's also back people when they win, because they won for a reason. They're able to get more people to support what their agenda is and what they say they're going to do. And if you don't like them, make sure they follow through on it. But really, that support, people will not, good people will not run. And so people who would be capable of doing things will not run if they don't feel like they're going to get supported. And so I really think we can do a better job, and that's why we do the best we can from NCGOP to support our people and not snipe at them every time. If there's something that I personally may or may not like, I'm not going to go out and attack them for that.
I actually am a fan of Don Brown. I absolutely adore the man. I've sat down and spoken to him many times, and people will be like, I know you like Don Brown. Why won't you bash Whatley? Because I don't have anything against Whatley. I just like Don Brown. You know what I mean? And no matter what, at the end of the day, one of them is going to run against Cooper. And when that happens, I can guarantee you everybody knows I don't like Cooper. I'm going to be voting for the conservative candidate, whoever it may be. So why would I bash one or the other? It makes no sense to me. And once again, I don't know that much about politics, but that's my stance. And I feel like that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And I wish more people would follow that lead. And so the importance of a primary is to have these candidates run their races and tell you why you should vote for them. The NCGOP, and I know people get tired of hearing us say this, we are neutral. It doesn't mean we're neutered. I will respond to things when asked, but a lot of times that primary process is where more people get to know those candidates. If you think about what the primaries, and it's so close, it's March next year, there's going to be, over 1 million people are going to come out and vote. That's such an opportunity now for them to make their cases. It's an opportunity for our party to say, hey, these are the people that have signed up to put their name on the ballot. They're out running, and these are issues, because you can have a primary candidate lose, but if they tap into an issue, that's something we can use later on. And so we're always wanting to expand that coalition and being able to talk about things that others say, this is important to me, and knowing what that is. Because if it doesn't get a certain candidate through a primary, hey, that's an issue we can pick up on later on and say, this is great, and we're going to add that and continuing that process. I wish, a primary or even a general is not the end of the road. There's always going to be the next candidate, the next issues, the next thing. And so being able to build that sustaining infrastructure is what's so important from a party perspective.
Back to the grassroots a little bit. How does the North Carolina GOP support grassroots candidates? Because I'm not really sure how you guys operate, but once again, people can be a little harsh. And there have been allegations that the North Carolina GOP will kind of support the establishment candidate and just kind of ignore the grassroots candidate. But I feel like there's truth always somewhere in the middle. So, what do you guys do to help support grassroots?
Yeah, what I would say is that from a party perspective, our job and our first responsibility is to our counties and districts. And so giving them, because the county chair, again, is the one of the most important people in politics. So they're the ones who are organizing people to go door knock, to make phone calls, going to fairs and festivals, putting those floats together. You see that right now, every Christmas parade. Most of the time we have people represented there. People aren't getting paid to do that. They're doing it because they feel that responsibility. And so our job is to help them with what they need and say, these are examples we have. We do county chair boot camps a couple times a year to say, this is what we can offer you to do that. Fortunately, not everyone will always listen at a certain level. And so what we try to do is provide that support because the party will be there to support the candidates who win. That's why, and I think it's interesting that people say we don't support one candidate over another. Well, if there are races that are more competitive, of course we're going to focus more on winning those because there's a good chance we could lose them. And there are candidates who will work with you and do great things. There are candidates who don't even know we exist. Um, and so that makes it hard. And what I have learned, especially going through the last presidential cycle, is you can only help people who want help.
That's very true. Let's talk about the upcoming 2028 gubernatorial race. We have ended up with two in a row Democrat governors. One of them, to me, much worse than the other, but we're going to get to that here in a few minutes. A lot of people are curious how, with a majority in the NCGA, does the NCGOP continue to end up losing the governor's seat in North Carolina? I mean, we vote red when it comes to president. The majority of our districts are red, and yet we continue to lose the governor's seat. Why is that happening, and what are we doing to turn that around in 2028?
Yeah, so I'll go through a little bit of history here. So, one of the worst elections I can ever remember in North Carolina was 2008. Barack Obama wins the state. He's the first Democrat to win on the presidential level. We lose a Senate race, governor. We didn't have either House of the General Assembly. We didn't have a majority on the Supreme Court. We didn't have a majority of congressional representatives. I also got food poisoning the day of that election. I thought that was a harbinger of things to come. But let's look at where we are now. We have not lost a presidential election since then in North Carolina. We haven't lost a U.S. Senate race since then in North Carolina. We took the majority in the General Assembly in 2010 and have kept it ever since. We have a majority on the Supreme Court. We can take out every single Democrat on the Court of Appeals in 2026. We have 10 of 14, soon to be 11 of 14 congressional seats that'll be Republican controlled. We've actually done a lot of great work. And it's because of that that Democrats have solidified their in-state and out-of-state money to say, well, at least we can still have the governor's seat. So they're putting so much attention on keeping that because it's their one power source they have left. And I think that Republicans really need to have candidates who can raise the money it takes to win this. You can't just, I'm gonna get in trouble for saying this, but whatever, I'll say it. You can't just have the grassroots and win. You've got to have the finances and the money too. And Democrats now have a very good model where they've been able to recruit out-of-state money. 2020, Roy Cooper's kickoff event for his reelection was in New York City. Like, they have so much of an advantage because of that incumbency factor, and he just transferred it over to Josh Stein. And yeah, Josh Stein is going to raise a crap ton of money to win reelection. And we need to acknowledge that, and we need to vote for people who have not just that grassroots connection, but will be able to bring in the money it takes to dislodge an incumbent governor. It's not easy, and it doesn't happen often, but I believe we can make it happen because of the work we've done everywhere else. It's the last power source that Democrats have in this state, and once Republicans win it, they're going to be gone forever.
It rubs me wrong to hear that Democrats from New York or California or anywhere else are interfering in North Carolina politics, and that's just the way I view it. If you're fueling funds into North Carolina races to sway our elections, then you are interfering in North Carolina politics. Is there a way to make that stop?
Unfortunately, it's not. Mainly because what you saw with the Citizens United case with the Supreme Court, and I'm not an attorney, my wife is, so I only know a little bit of this, but essentially what it comes down to is the money is speech. And so, yes, you still have a right to free speech, and Democrats got very good at going to these places like New York, California, Illinois, unfortunately, even out of the country. Hans Borg Wies is someone that everyone who's watching this should know, who has pumped billions of dollars through nonprofits to sway elections in our country. But you can either be mad about it, or let's say, let's throw everything we can at winning this, because once they're dislodged, that's going to be such a huge issue that we're able to have that space now where we're able to extend Republicans, putting them on the boards and commissions, seeing those policies come through, and really dislodging the power that Democrats have from the governor's office.
Well, that kind of leads into the discussion about Cooper. And a lot of people know I cannot stand Cooper. And what's wild about that is, and sorry, y'all, I don't loathe Stein. I cannot stand Cooper. And I have very valid reasons from that, spanning from COVID to Encore to Hurricane Helene. I just feel like he is not the person who is actually going to look out for my people. And he's about to run. And a lot of people are saying that there's a real good chance that he's going to win. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's going to be a battle, and it's going to be a battle every day through November when we find out, is 40 years enough for Roy Cooper? So what we have to do, and what I do pretty much every day, it's what can we find about Cooper next? What can we hit on to make sure people know? Because like you, I don't usually get personal about too many things, but Roy Cooper got personal with me when I was a journalist who kicked my newspaper out of briefings and refused to let us ask questions for 430 some days. Oh yeah, so this is a great one. So when the press briefings moved to a virtual format, I was at North State Journal at the time. So the first couple days, I was able to ask questions about what was happening with the response. Being able to really figure out, okay, there's this weird virus, but why are schools now closed, and why are we got to wear a mask everywhere? That stopped. But every day that there was a briefing, I would dial in. I would say, hey, I want to ask a question. Hey, I want to ask you, every single day. Was never getting called on. It was always people from other outlets who would write whatever Cooper wanted them to write. So I got curious one day. I said, I'm going to find out more about this system. You paid for, and I paid for, taxpayers, a Democrat software that was used to be able to screen every reporter that came in. The ones who were able to be called on were ones selected by the people in his office. And so for that reason, we were not able to ask a question until the first briefing that was back in person, which was late in 2021. Roy Cooper and his people in the governor's office refused to let outlets who may say something they didn't like from being able to ask questions in front of everyone else for almost 2 years.
Wow. I was wondering during COVID, because there came this point, and it was when my mama died. I hadn't seen her for a year, and I was finally getting ready to go see her when she got sick, and she got sick with sepsis. She was in the Alzheimer's unit, and I feel like if we had been allowed to see her, a family member probably would have known that she was in pain. She might have lived a little bit longer, at least so that our family could tell her goodbye. Then her funeral, they wanted us socially distanced. And I lost that entire last year with one of the people who have meant the most to me in my entire life. And I think it was around that time when I started like really trying to look into COVID, and there wasn't anything from the conservative viewpoint out there. It was like you couldn't find anything. Like it was, this is the way it's got to be, period. You're not allowed to say anything else. So it kind of, it doesn't shock me to find out that Cooper was doing that to conservative reporters, but it blows my mind that this is the first time I'm hearing someone actually verbalize it.
Yeah, I went so far undercover. I called up the people, the software company that they used, which was used by Democrats for their campaigns, is what was used, and our tax dollars paid for it. I said, hey, your system's being used by the governor of North Carolina. That's so cool. I'm undercover. What can you tell me about it? He's like, oh, really? That's strange. Because what it allowed you to do was pick and choose who could talk and who couldn't. And so, therefore, his office was able to say, we're only going to call on these reporters. So I know I'm not the only one either. Brett Jensen from WBT Radio had this happen to him. People from Carolina Journal had this happen to him. Had it happened to me and AP Dillon, who was my ace reporter at North State Journal. And so it was just a level of control to where I can remember every day I almost hated dialing in because I was like, I'm going to listen to this. I'm going to hear that man's voice for 30 minutes and I'm not going to get to ask him anything. I'm not going to be able to do all the things that I would like to be able to do to raise those issues. I could still write about it, but it's only as far as your readership goes to whether it's actually going to make a difference. And that's why I can remember we spent a lot of time watching what was happening in Florida with Governor DeSantis at the time. Like, okay, this is a different take of things. So that's why we would write about that because we wanted to get as much as we knew our viewpoint out. But yeah, it's hard because you didn't have the reach at the time. And when you're not being able to get anything from the people who should be able to call on you to listen, they didn't want to be challenged at the end of the day. And so that's just very much the Cooper mindset. And that's the traditional Democratic Party's mindset of we don't want to be challenged. We have the power. This is how it's going to be. And that's why I fight so hard against that because they don't deserve the power.
It kind of reminds me of Encore. When that broke, people on the left just kind of shut down. They didn't want to discuss it. They still don't want to discuss it. Well, there's still people in North Carolina who still don't have their homes. They still don't have their homes fixed. They still don't have what was promised to them. And so few people seem to know about it. And there are newspapers, media, and, people on the left who actually praise Cooper for his storm relief efforts, not just for Hurricane Helene, but, for Matthew and Florence. Can you make that make sense to me? I don't understand how it's optics. This is why I hate optics. And I feel like that's what that was.
It was absolutely optics. And so you would have people who would tell you things. It was like, yeah, this is really not going well. I can remember for years, but okay, I know this. We go on the record and talk about it. They're like, I can't because they were still expecting to get contracts. They wanted the money to be able to do that. They were scared to go on the record about it. And so what I think you're seeing now, hopefully, is people with Auditor Bullock's audit. You've seen that. You've been able to see there are reports, people saying, hey, if you go on the Facebook page for Encore, there are people who will make those comments. Please, anyone go look at those and see that no, Roy Cooper did not do a good job with any of this. And so that's where I just am excited in the sense that with the Senate race and him stepping in, there is enough money from a national level and the groups are aware of this that yes, we can absolutely make this an issue and educate people on who Roy Cooper really is.
I don't think that you have to make it an issue. To me, it is an issue. And I think that a lot of people fail to realize that many of the people who were let down by Encore are people who would typically vote for Cooper. So not only did he let down North Carolinians, he let down his own supporters.
And that's one of the most astounding things to me is that you've seen what he's done firsthand. And unfortunately, there are people who will still go and pull that D name on the ballot, no matter who it is. And so that voter apathy and that voter education, that's why, as much as we can do, it'll never be enough to get everyone.
I feel like the Whatley versus Brown thing is going to play a huge role in whether Cooper takes this seat or not. And so I would like to talk about Whatley versus Brown. A lot of people commented about this. I promised everybody I would not wear kitty gloves. Okay. The worst allegation out there was that the GOP has a campaign fund for Whatley before the primary. Is that true? And if so, how can that be justified?
So, what everyone's talking about, and again, I'll remind people be discerning with your sources. The RNC has a provision called a Rule 11 to where if a candidate in a primary wants to raise money above and beyond what they would bring in for their own campaign committee, they can do so. And so that was invoked from the RNC when President Trump endorsed Michael Whatley. And again, I'm neutral, I'm just stating facts. So what that Rule 11 does is it allows a group, like it allows the NCGOP, it allows groups supporting him at a certain level. If you're able to bring in donors who have that money, it comes to the party to be set aside for the general election. So there is nothing about that that allows you to spend that money on behalf of anyone in a primary. It goes strictly to the general election fund. So when you donate to a campaign, let's say you want to do a maximum donation to Don Brown right now. When you have an amount for the primary and an amount for the general, oftentimes it's bundled together as one number. Say, and I believe it's 7,000. So 3,500 for the primary, 3,500 for the general. The money that NCGOP gets from combined fundraising goes strictly to that general pot. It's to spend on campaign activities for the general election. Obviously, every candidate wants to use as much as they can for a primary, which they are allowed to do. So, and we've said this in other forums, if other candidates want to engage in agreement with that, absolutely happy to. Michael Whatley is the only one who has engaged to do that. If anyone else wants to do that, more than welcome. Come see us at 1506 Hillsborough Street. We're more than happy to get as much money as we can for the general election. And so I hope that clears things up.
The next one, and I would assume that the answer is yes, but we'll find out. Whoever wins the primary will be the person to run against Cooper, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. And so the North Carolina GOP will back whoever wins the primary. 100%. Okay. All right. So my next question is, do you believe that Whatley can defeat Cooper? And I ask this because repeatedly on X, I have seen people say, I won't vote for Whatley. Not sure why when we're talking about running against Cooper, but I see it all the time. So how can the NCGOP, if Whatley wins that primary, unify the base and get them behind Whatley so that we can take down Cooper?
Yeah, I think it's incumbent upon everyone after the primary to reach out and make that effort. I speak with personal experience in that I've seen how hard Michael Whatley works. I saw it in 2019 when he ran for state party chair, being up at 11, 12, 1 a.m., going through delegate counts and things. The man works really hard. I have not met Don Brown personally. I'm sure he's a terrific guy. I would love the chance to at some point. I can only speak to what I know. And answering the question that you've asked, again, I'm neutral. I can only speak that I've worked with him in the past, and I was the RNC's person in North Carolina from a communication standpoint in 2024. Yeah, it was pretty cool to where if we needed something, we could call up Michael Whatley and say, hey, we need X, Y, and Z here. And it's like, got it, 100%, good to go. That's a really cool thing. And I hope that we've been able to continue that relationship with the new RNC chair. But yeah, anyone is going to have a tough battle on their hands because these Senate races are always tough. And you're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to try and sway that 50+1 to come our way. So can he do it? Can Don Brown do it? Absolutely. But it's going to be a battle because Roy Cooper will be very well funded in this race. And we cannot lose sight of the fact that the man has been in office for 40 years. You're looking at the next Joe Biden when you're looking at Roy Cooper. And that's something that everyone needs to acknowledge and understand going into this race.
I agree. A lot of people have asked, why is he running for governor? And I think because he's going to run for president. That's why. He is a career politician. And when I look at the way that he has handled things that directly impacted North Carolina locals, which is my bread and butter, and I see how he let us down, I cannot believe that there are so many people who are willing to get behind him based on name alone. So I'm praying that the North Carolina GOP and everybody comes together, because I don't want to see Cooper in a Senate seat after everything that we saw during his tenure as governor.
100% agree.
Let's talk about branding a little bit. I actually saw a post by Sloan Breathmuth. Please forgive me if I said that wrong, Sloan. I apologize. But she was talking about, you know, RNC, and she was talking about branding. And I know that, you know, there's a difference between the North Carolina GOP and the RNC. But what she said is that the GOP has a branding problem. We have divided messaging. And so I started thinking about that, and I thought about the shrimping trawl ban. There were Republicans who were on board for that. When you talk about raw milk, there are Republicans who want to ban raw milk. Constitutional carry. There are conservatives who are against constitutional carry. And whenever you're talking about someone like me, I'm a constitutional conservative. And so I don't think that you should be, you know, limiting my rights at all. And I really don't think that you should be getting in the way of, you know, things that to me are cultural. I mean, I grew up on a cattle farm. I drank raw milk. You know, I also grew up on the coast. And so shrimping and fishing, these are things that have been part of the way of life for generations. Do you think that there is a branding problem, and do you think that we're seeing divided messaging, and how do you believe that that can be corrected moving forward?
So where I see this is it's still a debate of ideas, and so we welcome that. Would it be easier sometimes if I were a Democrat and say this is how it's going to be? Here you go, hand it to the media, they're going to write about it. No, that's not how we operate, and I'm glad we don't operate that way, because I think the debate is important. But I also wish that there was a little more of, we can debate this issue, but if we need support on something else that's happening, yeah, we're going to get behind you for this issue. And so everyone, I wish sometimes would just kind of take a beat and say, I'm still mad about this, but I'm willing to support you because we need these other things done. And I think that's just that's where I come from. That's the way that I kind of see my role, at least. If I were, you know, not at the party right now, maybe I may think differently. I don't know. But from my vantage point and where I see things is, you can have these debates and they're healthy and they're still going to go on. Again, I mentioned Rush Limbaugh earlier. Every Republican I've ever met loved Rush Limbaugh. He took it to George W. Bush over immigration reform in 2006 and 2007, blew up the phone lines of Congress, shut them down. But at the end of the day, everyone was still a Republican, and they still said, okay, these issues are important. But yes, you can argue about them, and those arguments are good. But also recognize that when our people need support to take another stand on something else, it's okay to support them when they do that too. And so not being able to say, well, if you don't do this, I'm never going to vote for you again. Like, that doesn't help anyone. First of all, because it's not true. Yes, I'm telling you it's not true. You'll still vote for that person. But just be honest in the standpoint is like, yeah, I don't like this, but our people need to be supported, or you will not have good people run in the future for these offices.
I do wish, though, that there are some things, principally, I can't believe I'm going to say this, I'm going to sound like a total libertarian, but principally, there are certain things, constitutional carry being one of them, that I see not as a right that the government gives me, but I see it as a God-given right. And so I can understand people who would argue that anybody who is a Republican who is not behind supporting that constitutional right, something that is coded, and us being allowed to carry our firearms without concealed permit. I can see those people being a little upset about that, because to me that goes against the very basis of what a conservative is supposed to stand for.
I'll say everyone goes through a libertarian phase. Most of us grow out of it. But yeah, and that's an issue to where I think that we need some recognition of we've already gotten rid of the pistol permit thing, that which was instituted by Democrats to keep lawful, especially black people, from owning guns for a very long time. We finally got rid of that. And so I would say that it's okay to keep pushing on that issue. And if you have someone who doesn't agree with it, then you have, at a certain time, you have a primary, you can try to take them out and beat them. And so I see what you're saying, and I agree. A gun owner myself, I'm not going to tell you how many I have, everything. But
All mine were lost in a boating accident, so
I wish that's one to where there's been progress made, but when you're talking about rights and laws, you're looking at two different things, and sometimes you still need to change the laws to catch up with where our rights are.
In this particular post that I was talking about, there was also, kind of the allegation that there are some unpopular leaders within the GOP. And I guess I can kind of see that. I feel like, personality wise, I loved Mark Robinson. Absolutely adore him. I love his accent. I loved his ideas. But unfortunately, that big, huge scandal was devastating, because I feel like he probably could have won that race and ended up losing it because of the scandal. But then there's also people like Harvey West. There are different leaders within the North Carolina GOP who aren't very popular, some of them for very good reason. What can be done about that? Can anything be done about that? Because I feel like she was right in saying that, when you have unpopular leaders, that kind of degrades the trust overall in the GOP.
And that's a tough one there. No, I think it's fair, but you also have so many leaders that are really trying to do the right thing. And so it's really, what are you specifically looking for? And this is to where this goes back to a point I made earlier, that what the party is and isn't are different things. If you're looking for someone that you agree on a personality with, encourage them to start a podcast, to get active posting on social media. Do the things that's going to benefit you. I love seeing the ecosystem continue to develop here, because that's one thing we're never going to get the legacy media on our side to start writing Republican talking points like they write Democrat talking points, right? And so we have to build our own ecosystem and continue to work on that. So those personalities that you think do the right things, if they don't want to be involved in elective office, encourage them to make those voices heard. That's why I love being on X so much and scrolling. Even when I may not post for a day or two, I'm still looking, because I still love seeing where the conversation goes. Doing more podcasts, doing writing, doing all the things it takes that makes up a movement, and not just a political party. Because I think we have a movement going on in our state right now of conservatism. I think it's continuing to be on the rise. And you don't need the NCGOP leading you in every instance of that. You can do your own thing and empower yourself. That's truly, I think, at our core, being an individual, and say, I have these things I want to say, then say them. The party exists for a vehicle. But what we're really trying to do is grow not just the party, which, yes, it's important, pays the salary, so thanks for everyone for donating. But really building that movement. That's why I was at North State Journal for 4 years. I wanted to elevate voices that were making a difference, because the culture is so much more important than the political battle of the day.
All right, one last question. So you and I have talked previously about the role of influencers and podcasters and people who do what I do and the conservative movement. the left has been very good about using influencers to appeal to the youth, to spread a message, to even go on attack. And the GOP has kind of sidestepped that in a way. You don't see conservatives getting involved in that way when you talk about influencers and stuff. But then Trump, during his last campaign, that's exactly what he did. That's exactly what he tapped into. So, do you think that moving forward, we're going to see the North Carolina GOP and conservatives in general in this sphere more often, just like you and I right now, where you're sitting down with somebody who's a podcaster or an influencer and they're covering, you know, conservative events and these types of things? Do you think that that's where the GOP is now heading?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's important to stay engaged and stay doing that. I think President Trump showed that, yes, this is a voting bloc you can tap into that hasn't been tapped into before. Because I think what we have, especially when Elon bought Twitter, turned it into X, you saw such an explosion of that. And there are people who I may not agree with on every issue, but I want them to continue. I want you to continue to use your voice and speak out. I want to use my voice as much as I can, whether I'm at the party or not in the future, to expand on that. And I think that as we go into what we have in 2026, it's going to take those efforts to be successful, to win, to stop Roy Cooper, but to also talk about why Republicans have made such incredible progress in this state now, to talk about our wins and highlights. I don't know that we do a good enough job at that. And so I'm fully on board and supportive of continuing to expand that movement, because that's the way we become dominant again.
I love to hear that, actually. All right, so can you tell everybody how they can get involved, whether it be locally or whether it be with the state or in their district? How can people get involved with the North Carolina GOP?
Yeah, so easy one will be nc.gop. We have all of the county parties listed there. Really, your county parties are a good entrance into what it takes to become a delegate to the state convention, to the national conventions, to be able to get involved, to go into the monthly meetings, and then go to every county will have a convention in March 2026. Every county then sends people to their district conventions in April, and then state convention in June. We put on a 4-day program. We're going to have some incredible speakers coming up, so it's going to be a good time. And so there's a lot to look forward to. Again, nc.gop, and follow NCGOP on social media too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks, Cassie.
Talk about the history, let's talk about them hills. Let's talk about the gold might be waiting